Len Wiseman's John Wick spin-off film Ballerina has just been released in theatres, and the new action film starring Ana de Armas, Keanu Reeves, Ian McShane and many more is another great instalment in the franchise. In fact, after Ballerina, I think this has been one of the most consistent film series of quality, delivering one great film after another. Set during John Wick 3 and then before Chapter 4, the film sees Eve Macaro, played by Ana de Armas, training in the assassin tradition of Ruska Roma like John Wick before her. Macaro also begins a revenge campaign against her father's killers, a mysterious organisation known as the Cult. It's rammed with traditional Wick action and some creative sequences, and for the most part, it's pretty damn good. So in this explained analysis, I'm going to be giving you my breakdown and brief review of Ballerina, discussing the full plot details, the ending, the John Wick scenes, and much more. There will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't watched the film yet, then I would recommend checking it out before watching my analysis. Before I get into it though, if you want to see more on upcoming releases like Ballerina, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's dive into my explained video for Ballerina from the world of John Wick. So Eve Macaro is the daughter of a skilled assassin who lost his life while safeguarding Eve from a mysterious cult. She was mainly brought up under the guidance of the director of the Ruska Roma, who was introduced in John Wick Chapter 3, and under them, Eve belongs to a collective of assassins referred to as the Kikimora. Much like John Wick's moniker of the Baba Yaga, the Kikimora draw inspiration from a figure in Slavic mythology. Similar to the household spirits of Slavic lore, the Kikimora are powerful, capable of being both terrifying and beneficial, yet their main objective is to provide protection. In the John Wick films, the Ruska Roma is one of the criminal organisations represented at the High Table. The group, consisting of Belarusian contract killers, operates a ballet academy that serves as a cover for their assassin training centre. The director, who leads the Ruska Roma, took in John Wick when he was a young orphan and trained him to become the fighter we know. She swiftly evolved into a mentor and a mother figure for the boy, who was then called Jadani. Although John Wick would rise to become one of the most feared assassins ever recognised by the High Table, he initially worked as an assassin for another crime organisation, the Tyrannosov Mob. Nevertheless, he remains affiliated with the Ruska Roma, the most obvious example being his tattoo of the Cross of Lorraine, which symbolises the Roma and is also associated with the Russian Orthodox Church. He hoped that his service would be sufficient to persuade the director to officially release him from his obligations. The director almost reluctantly grants him his freedom, but not without warning him that by severing his ties to the Ruska Roma, he will no longer be able to seek their assistance. At the beginning of Ballerina, Javier, who is Eve's father, was murdered in an assassination plot orchestrated by his father-in-law, the Chancellor, a dozen years prior. Javier was in hiding, attempting to safeguard his young daughter, whom the Chancellor desires solely to continue the bloodline of his cult-like crime organisation that has been operating for 200 years without a central base. Following her father's demise, Eve encounters Ian McShane's character Winston, who takes her to the Ruska Roma theatre, where the director trains her not only to become a ballerina, but also to be a skilled assassin. We skip to meet adult Eve many years later, and this is where the timeline catches up during the events of John Wick Chapter 3. The new film gives us the same scene from Chapter 3, where John Wick approaches the director for assistance, but this time it's viewed through a different perspective. Similar to John Wick, Eve was taken in by the Ruska Roma following her father's death. In Ballerina, we discovered that it was actually Winston Scott, the manager of the New York Continental, who played a key role in facilitating her adoption by the organisation. This appears to validate Winston's deeper connection to the group, but it likely dispels the theory that he could be Wick's biological father. Anyway, as we find out, Eve has dedicated herself to become an expert assassin, aiming to rival the legendary John Wick. When they do cross paths at the theatre, Eve is merely a novice, eager to enter the world of contract killing. She seeks advice from the greatest in the field, but by that time, John Wick has changed his stance on being an assassin. Just months prior, he was enjoying retirement and would have remained in that peaceful existence if it weren't for the Russian gangsters who took the life of the puppy gifted to him by his late wife. So when Eve inquires about how to become a master assassin, his response is not to become one. He advises her to exit the theatre and abandon the life of an assassin altogether, encouraging her to carve out a new future for herself before it's too late. While it's certainly the right advice, John Wick himself hasn't followed through on that, and it's clear that exiting this lifestyle has its consequences as well. Eve must come to grips with the harsh reality that her choices carry weighty consequences, some of which can be fatal. After a quick introduction where Eve demonstrates her skills in the classic John Wick club scene, the narrative shifts to her quest for revenge following her father's murder. Upon seeing an assassin bearing the same mark as one of her father's killers, it becomes yet another revenge story. But as John Wick sought retribution for his dog, Eve Macaro is determined to avenge her father. As the adult Eve embarks on a quest for vengeance against the Chancellor and probes into their enigmatic cult, the director of the Ruska Roma cautions her that she is about to ignite a conflict with this merciless faction. Even with that in mind, Eve disobeys and makes her way to the Prague Continental, where she discovers that Norman Reedus' character Daniel Pine is an ex-member of the Chancellor's cult and, intriguingly, his son. We learn that the cult he was once a part of are after his daughter, Ella, which mirrors Eve's own childhood experiences, intensifying her personal stakes in the matter. In the midst of her aiming to assassinate him, both of them are pursued and are eventually attacked, resulting in Daniel's daughter being captured. Unaware of where the cult's headquarters actually is, Eve decides to visit a local gunsmith named Frank, but she now finds herself with a bounty. Eve's unauthorized quest for revenge does not sit well with the director, who eventually opts to assist the Chancellor to ensure her own safety and that of the Ruska Roma. The director emphasizes that her concern lies not with one individual, but with the collective. Therefore, whether it involves John Wick or Eve, she is prepared to sacrifice them to safeguard the Ruska Roma's existence. Eve and weapons expert Frank are attacked in the middle of Eve being offered his weaponry, and they are able to get out of the situation, with Eve using a vest of grenades and Frank also surviving his encounters. When meeting Eve, Frank was reluctant to give her information about the cult's whereabouts, but after their grueling fight against the cult members, he gives her a rough indication of where they might be. So armed with this information, Eve sets out to find the man responsible for her father's death, and that is the Chancellor. This quest is not merely a job for Eve, as it has now become deeply personal. For many years, the Chancellor and his followers have resided in the secluded Austrian mountain village of Hallstatt. Eve travels there with the intent to end the Chancellor's life, but to accomplish this, she must confront an entire town of skilled killers, employing everything from ice skates to katana swords and even flamethrowers to defeat them. But as we soon learn, a comedic fight between Eve and a violent chef results in the Chancellor getting his hands on Eve when she arrives in Hallstatt. After capturing Eve, he reveals to her that she is one of the cult's missing children, and his right-hand assassin Lena discovers that Eve is her sister. So this means that the Chancellor is her maternal grandfather, and her father was his son. Once Lena finds out that Eve is her sister, she protects Eve from the Chancellor's henchmen, and she gives them the time to escape. But as we quickly learn, the Chancellor is fine with eliminating his own children, as shown by his unsuccessful attempt on Daniel Pine to take back Pine's daughter Ella earlier on in the film. He instructs his henchmen to eliminate both Eve and Lena, resulting in them throwing grenades into the building where the sisters were hiding, causing Eve to be injured and Lena to be killed. After failing to kill Eve, the Chancellor contacts the director of the Ruska Roma, declaring that he will hold the Roma accountable for Eve's behaviour. He reinforces this stance even when the director mentions that Eve is operating on her own. But in not wanting war, the director eventually reaches out to John Wick, urging him to pursue Eve and halt her by any means necessary. So this brings us to the ending of Ballerina, set just before the timeline of John Wick Chapter 4, where John arrives at the scene in Hallstatt. If you remember the concluding moments of Chapter 3, Winston fires at John Wick to protect both himself and the Continental. Miraculously, John Wick endures not just the gunshot, but also a plunge from the top of the Continental. He remains a fugitive from the high table and all others who are keen on claiming his nearly $20 million bounty. Although one might wonder why John Wick would still consider aiding the Ruska Roma at this stage in his journey, the regulations at the high table are unequivocal. If a name is presented to you, it is your duty to handle it. So in the case of the third act of Ballerina, John arrives in Hallstatt on a mission to eliminate Eve, only to find out that they have crossed paths previously. Less than a year after their initial conversation, both remain entrenched in the world of assassins. They confront each other, left with no alternative, but John ultimately chooses to spare her life, albeit with the caution regarding the rules and repercussions of the life they have embraced. He grants her until midnight to assassinate the Chancellor and to leave Hallstatt. However, John doesn't just choose to give her extended time because he ultimately decides to assist her as well. Armed with a sniper rifle, he defends her against an assassin named Dex, who is equipped with a flamethrower. In response, Eve uses an incredibly strong water hose to combat Dex's flames, while Wick shoots his gas tank, resulting in a massive explosion. So it's only with Wick's help that she manages to reach the Chancellor before the deadline expires. Eve eventually hunts down the vehicle that is taking the Chancellor and the still captive Ella. But as established previously, the Chancellor is not one to give in easily. He tries to persuade her to stay, insisting that the village will survive, the children will be brought up, and the cult system will persist. His statements are somewhat disturbing and suggest a possible correlation between the cult's operations and the manner in which the Ruska Roma operates. Yet Eve has decided that she has reached her breaking point and shoots him before he can continue speaking about the cult's legacy. Eve reconnects with Ella and brings her back to her father Daniel, who is severely injured but on the mend. The film then concludes with Eve observing her former Kikimora trainee friend Tatiana as she performs a genuine ballet, finally liberated from the high table's influence. She had been expelled from the Ruska Roma during the film's first act. As Eve watches on, her phone, along with the phones of many others, starts to ring. We learn that a contract has been placed on Eve for $5 million, paving the way for a possible sequel where Eve finds herself being pursued. The death of the Chancellor and the devastation of Hallstatt might first appear to be a significant setback for the cult, but as the Chancellor hinted to Eve, the cult has been operating in the shadows for centuries. So the concluding scene of Ballerina reveals that the cult still wields considerable influence and strength to place a substantial bounty on Eve. Therefore, it seems we will delve deeper into their operations should a sequel to Ballerina come to fruition. But that was my breakdown and analysis for Ballerina. Overall, I thought this was an excellent spin-off in the John Wick franchise, and in my eyes, it just continues to go from strength to strength. The action sequences were as excellent as they've ever been, and the way they evolved the world building through the locations, the characters, and the interlinked storytelling just makes the expanded narrative deeper the more you think about it. But to balance that, like every other Wick film, it finds its levity in the conversations between characters and the action scenes themselves. The only thing I didn't really love was the very last scene of the film, which to me just felt like the same ending we've had in a few Wick installments. The assassins' actions have consequences, a big bounty is placed on their head, and they are now on the run. I would have liked a slightly different ending to set up another film, but regardless, I do think they earned another one. So minus that repetitive point, I was impressed with Armas as Eve, and I can't wait to see more of her if we do get it. I also loved how they integrated John Wick's character and set him up as the one to come after Eve in the final act. It presented an interesting perspective, and even if Wick did eventually help her, you were afraid of the boogeyman for a brief amount of time. So I can't wait to see what they do next in the John Wick series, and like I said, it just keeps getting better. But I do hope this breakdown did help some of you guys understand the film and the main details a bit better, and overall, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it, so don't forget to let me know down below in the comment section. For more videos on upcoming film releases like Ballerina, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, rating, and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.